The Haunted Forest. Blackwood Forest had always been the kind of place parents warned their children about. Nestled at the edge of the small town of Willow Creek, it was a dense, brooding expanse of twisted trees and thick underbrush. Stories of people vanishing without a trace, ghostly apparitions, and disembodied voices made the forest infamous. Local legend spoke of an ancient tragedy, a village burned to the ground centuries ago, its inhabitants slaughtered in an act of revenge. Their restless spirits were said to wander the forest, bound to the place of their suffering. It began with the disappearance of a hiker. Daniel Morris, an experienced outdoorsman, ventured into Blackwood Forest one cool autumn morning and never came back. Search parties combed the area for weeks, but no trace of him was ever found. The forest seemed to resist their efforts. Maps became useless as paths twisted and turned in impossible ways. Compasses spun wildly, and radios failed to work. As a journalist, I was drawn to the mystery of Blackwood Forest. The stories of ghosts and disappearances had made it a local legend, but I wanted to uncover the truth. Armed with my camera, notebook, and enough supplies for a few days, I set out to explore the forest. The air grew colder as I entered the woods, and an oppressive silence fell over me. Even the sounds of birds and insects seemed to vanish. The deeper I ventured, the more unsettling the atmosphere became. By nightfall, I set up camp near a clearing. The darkness was absolute, the trees looming like silent sentinels. As I drifted off to sleep, a sound jolted me awake, a faint whisper, just beyond the glow of my campfire. I strained to listen, but the whispers faded into the rustling of leaves. Shaking off my fear, I convinced myself it was the wind, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The next morning, I discovered strange markings on the trees near my campsite. They were crude symbols carved deep into the bark, unfamiliar and unsettling. As I studied them, the whispers returned, louder now. They seemed to come from all directions, indistinct but insistent. I turned on my recorder, hoping to capture the sounds, but when I played it back, all I heard was static. That evening, I spotted something in the distance, a shadow moving between the trees. It was humanoid, but its movements were jerky and unnatural. I called out, but it didn't respond. Instead, it seemed to melt into the darkness. I tried to convince myself it was another camper, but the feeling of being watched persisted. The third night was the worst. The whispers grew louder, forming coherent words. "Leave," they hissed. "This is not your place." Then I heard my name softly at first, then louder, more insistent. It came from multiple directions, as though the forest itself was calling to me. Panic set in. I packed my things and started back the way I had come, but the path was gone. The forest had shifted, twisting itself into an impenetrable labyrinth. As I stumbled through the dark, I saw them, figures emerging from the shadows. They were translucent, their faces twisted in agony. Some reached out to me, their mouths moving silently, while others simply watched with hollow eyes. One spirit, a young woman with burns covering her body, whispered, "You cannot leave. You're one of us now." I ran, but no matter how far I went, the spirits followed. Exhausted and terrified, I stumbled upon a massive, gnarled tree at the heart of the forest. Its twisted branches stretched into the sky like skeletal arms, and its roots were tangled with bones. The whispers grew deafening here, a cacophony of voices pleading, threatening, and crying. At the base of the tree was a small stone altar, stained dark with what could only be blood. Symbols similar to those I'd seen earlier were carved into the stone, pulsating with an unnatural light. I realized the tree was the source of the haunting, a conduit for the spirits bound to the forest. If I wanted to escape, I had to sever its connection to the dead. Using my knife, I began to destroy the symbols on the altar. The whispers turned into screams, and the ground shook violently. The spirits surrounded me, their faces contorted in rage. They clawed at me, their icy touch sapping my strength. As I destroyed the final symbol, the spirits recoiled, their forms dissolving into mist. But the tree wouldn't let me go. Its roots wrapped around my legs, pulling me toward the altar. A voice boomed from the tree itself, deep and otherworldly. "You will pay the price for what you've done." I realized the ritual required a sacrifice. Without thinking, I plunged my knife into my hand, letting my blood drip onto the altar. The tree let out an ear-piercing wail before collapsing in on itself, taking the spirits with it. The forest released me after that. The paths became clear, and I stumbled out into the daylight, bloodied and shaken, but alive. The story of Blackwood Forest haunted me long after I returned home. I couldn't explain what I had experienced, but I knew one thing for certain. The spirits were gone, but the forest would never truly be safe. Months later, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a single branch from the tree, blackened and twisted. Attached was a note, written in a hand I didn't recognize. "The forest never forgets." The whispers returned that night,